Hey, gang. Welcome back to another episode of Try Not to Curse. Now, as I've mentioned in my episode with Dan recently, Marvel is not my last name, and I don't mention last names on the show, but this guest that I have today, we share a last name, and that's how we met one another. When Facebook came out, my father had already passed away at that time. And I have a very unique, very Polish last name, and just thought it would be interesting to see how many people out in the universe in the internets shared my last name and created a Facebook group all about my last name and looking for people with with that commonality. And my guest Robin joined that group, and we just kind of kept in touch over the years and just follow each other's lives on Facebook. We have never met in person, we've never spoken in person, aside from messaging back and forth on occasion on Facebook. But I think Robin is such a boss and has a really unique story. And I just wanted to get her on here to talk about all of the things that she's got going on, how she got to where she is now today, and just pick her brain as to, how we can get to where she's at if that is part of somebody's aspirational goals. So, Robin, thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Liz. I really appreciate it.
So, what is your official title?
So, I am the Vice President of Data Strategy and Operations for a major healthcare corporation.
And this is going to be a very long answer, but I think it's important. How does one get to a position like that? I mean, I couldn't tell you what you do.
Well, I have a really long answer for that because I don't have a linear career like most people do, where you just go the steps that normal people do. I'm actually a psychiatric nurse by background, so
Okay.
that's how I started life. I went to nursing school. Um, I was a neonatal intensive care nurse in the end of school, and my mentor said to me in the final days of my internship as a neonatal intensive care nurse, you'd make a great psych nurse. And I was like, ooh, that doesn't sound good. And she said, no, you just spend all your time with the parents. And I can tell that watching babies be sick is really hard for you. And she was not wrong. And so the next day I applied for a job at the local psychiatric hospital. And that's what I did for my first 13 years of my career, was take care of patients with mental illness. Loved it. I was really good at it. Eventually, I was director of behavioral health for the health system that I was working at in my 20s. And then we had a union attempt of the nurses, and they asked the nurses to vote for their most trusted leader. And I was on maternity leave at the time, so I didn't think I was even going to be a part of it. But apparently, I got voted as the most trusted leader. So they brought me back from maternity leave and gave me cardiovascular services too, because they thought those nurses could use a psych nurse as a leader. No joke about that too. Um,
Wow.
it was a wonderful team. I really enjoyed it. Knew nothing about cardiology, but I did know a little bit about leadership. And during the campaign, we worked really closely with these lawyers, and I became good friends with one of them who, like me, had nothing linear. She was a large animal vet and owned an organization that would get kids out of foster who were aging out of foster care and give them a place on their ranch and teach them about training horses. And I was fascinated with her life. And at one point we were having lunch and she said, if you stay at this hospital too long, you're going to become too homegrown and too single threaded. You should really kind of explore your options. And I think by then I was in my 30s, mid 30s, and I was getting a little stuck. And so I had done a presentation to a company called UHC that doesn't exist anymore. They were bought or merged with a bunch of other companies, but it was University Health System Consortium. And they came in and asked me to present how I got the quality in our cardiology department, the data to be so much better within such a short time. So I did a presentation, and the next day they called me and said, we'd love for you to come and be a consultant with all of our academic health systems. I knew nothing about consulting. It was going to be in supply chain consulting. I had never done anything in supply chain. So I said, sure, why not? So I learned it. I took the job first, and then I learned it as I went. And I was there for 5 years doing supply chain consulting. And at some point, I was talking to one of the leaders, and he said, you're advancing here the way that you should won't happen because people stay here forever, and we're small. And he's like, so if you start looking, I will support that. And so I wanted to go somewhere and work with critical access hospitals, which were tiny 25 bed hospitals in the middle of nowhere, because I'd been with these big behemoth health systems. And so I got offered the job of running clinical operations consulting and logistics consulting for a group that owned a bunch of critical access hospitals across the country. And I did that for 2 years. The travel was awful because, like, you take 4 flights to the middle of nowhere in these little,
Sure.
yeah, my body couldn't handle that. And so then I got recruited by Kaufman Hall in Chicago, which is a financial consulting firm. Knew nothing about finance or mergers or acquisitions, but I thought, why not? I'll try this. And I did that for 2 years. I learned what I wanted, what I went there to learn. And then I got recruited to the world's largest GPO, to run their whole advisory services team and a couple of acquired companies that they had, and did that for 6 years. Oh, and I left one out. I was asked to do some research at another company and did that for in between those two, just for a short period of time, but learned about research and then went and ran consulting. And I was a high-level senior executive. It was a lot of work. And at one point I was like, I call uncle. And so they let me lead a group that worked with their academic organizations to start networking groups for like chief quality officers and chief medical officers and chief operating officers. And I loved that. But at one point, an old friend from the company that I worked with, Critical Access Hospitals, needed a data lead for his company. And he thought of me and called me and said, would you come and take this role? And I said, well, I don't know anything about product and technology. This seems like a good idea.
I'm seeing a trend here.
That is my whole life, is like somebody challenges me and I'm like, challenge accepted.
I love it.
So yeah. And every time I have fun and I learn something new, I'm still learning about product and technology. A lot of young techie people work for me. It's, it's your typical kind of Silicon Valley environment. I live in Chicago, but my office is in Nashville. We have scooters and ping pong tables and a beer tap in the office, and everybody wears graphic tees. And, I'm the old lady there. I'm in my mid 50s. So I'm like everybody's mom. I'm learning how to code, which is, in your 50s, learning anything is more challenging.
That's wild.
Yeah. I'm learning all these things that I never thought I would be learning at this age. But really what they want me to do is to develop the strategy around healthcare data, which I do understand. And then when I left the last company, it had become, they give stock to senior executives. So I had accumulated some stock, but when I left, I really wanted to do something different with it. I didn't want to the stock market to me is boring. And so a friend or a former employee of mine called and said, hey, I'm investing in this new venture and it's right up your alley. He was going to open a mental health therapy clinic in Texas. And he was doing it through a franchising company. And he said, would you be interested? And I'm like, well, I have this stock that I wanted to invest. I want to do something good for the community. So in 2 weeks, I'll be opening the first of 3 mental health therapy clinics in our local community, in addition to my day job.
Yeah, that's well, and that's just it. Like, again, following you over the years and seeing, your Facebook posts, it's a lot of traveling. It's a lot of, I've got this going on. I've got that meeting going on. And I just, like I said, I just sit back and I watch you and I'm like, what a boss. She's doing all of these things. And she, but then, so again, you're based in Illinois. Did you grow up in Illinois? Is that where you're from originally?
Yeah, I have been here within a 10-mile radius my entire life. Like my parents and my husband's parents still live 30 minutes from us. And yeah,
okay.
we're kind of dug in here, even though I look out my window and I see 2 feet of snow and I'm like, why? But all of our friends and family are here and, we all survive all the winter together. And so, yeah.
But again, just going over it seems like you have not only have you experienced a whole lot, but like you said, you're learning a whole lot. And that seems to be, you just sound like you're a very curious person. Who says the stock market is boring? Like, so clearly you just, you're always looking for the next thing, looking to learn. It seems like you're just fascinated by anything new and unknown, which is fantastic.
I am a lifelong, I would say if I was going to say anything about what I am, I'm a lifelong learner. Like I'm
Yeah.
always, and my dad was the same way. I think I get this from him. Like he would, something would tweak his interest in bow hunting. He won't kill an animal, but he learned everything there was to know about bow hunting, got all the equipment, and then decided instead of shooting bows, even though he was really good at it, he would shoot animals with a camera. So he became like an Ansel Adams level large format photographer. And it
Oh,
was just,
wow.
he takes something as a hobby and then he becomes an expert at it. And so I wouldn't characterize myself as an expert at anything, but I like to constantly be learning. And I'm really glad that that never went away as I started to get older, and I don't want to get
Yeah.
stuck in my ways because then you become boring. So
Well, so what drew you to the medical field in the first place? You know, when you were in high school thinking about college, what was it that motivated you to get into the nursing field?
that was interesting because originally my two things that I wanted to be were either a forensic anthropologist,
Ooh.
which I think is still fascinating. And part of me is like,
Yeah.
maybe before I retire, I'll become a forensic anthropologist. I there's a lot more learning there that I'm probably willing to
Yeah.
do. And a journalist. And I was going to be paying for college on my own. It was not something that my parents were in a position to do. And kind of sat down and said, I need to do something where I immediately am going to get a job out of college. And then I can do anything that I dream of. So it was practical at first, but at the same time, my grandfather, who I was living with my grandparents when I graduated from high school, because they were closer to college for me. And I couldn't afford room and board. So like that was a non-starter. And he had a series of strokes and was in hospice, but we brought him home to take care of him ourselves. And I learned to be a nurse by taking care of my grandpa. And I realized I was actually really good at it. And I liked to work with people. I liked to be a nurse. There were
Mhm.
certain kinds that I knew I'd never be good at, like neonatal intensive care nurse. But yeah, and so it was it was a great way to start a series of different careers. But when people still, even though I've been a senior executive and I own a business and all that, if you ask me, I'll tell you I'm a psych nurse even now. So once a nurse,
Well,
I keep my license up, and I could still go work in the hospital if I
yeah.
wanted.
Well,
So
I mean, it seems like you almost went from one extreme to another, being a natal care nurse to then a psychiatric nurse. I mean, obviously you're dealing with very different subjects, but both are very heavy, and
mhm.
and I'm definitely not only emotionally draining but mentally draining, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Um, so what was it that kept you in that field as a psychiatric nurse for so long?
That is a great question, and what really good one, because I was in it for a few, maybe 6, 7 months, and I was working in a small private hospital, and they had a unit called the Rafa unit, um, which was it was a not the unit that I typically worked on. I worked with adult chemical dependency, like dual diagnosis patients, was basically
Okay.
where I started my career. Rafa was a religious organization that rented space, and most of their patients were child sexual predators.
Okay.
And I got floated to that unit one night. And by the end of the night, I swear everybody was in restraints. Like it was the most disturbing night of my life.
Ooh.
They'd come in with belongings. A lot of them had pictures. And um, I still can't really talk about that night. But so I went to my mentor at the hospital and I said, why am I doing this? And he said, well, number one, you never have to go back there again, because he could see that this was not, I would not stay if that was going to be a requirement. And he said, number two, in psychiatry and in behavioral health, you never cure anyone. Like that's not the goal. The goal is to make the moments that you spend with that patient a little bit safer, a little bit better, a little bit more respectful than what they're probably experiencing in the outside world, so that they can build up the tools to cope with whatever they're going through, be it depression or suicidal ideation or anxiety. Or we had schizophrenic patients, bipolar patients, who needed me more than anybody. And very shortly into my career, I would start to get letters from patients after they were gone. And the things that they said, like, you called me ma'am, or you referred to me as Ms. in my last name, and no one's ever shown me that respect before. And it was like, if I can make someone's life better by just basic common courtesy, what's better than that? Like, what's better than being that person for somebody else? And so
Yeah.
that's why I stayed in it so long. And I only left when some of the physicality of it got to be too much in my late 30s, like
Sure.
right almost when I turned 40. It's a very physical job.
Yeah.
And there was some violence. Nurses are targets of way more violence than probably the average person understands. And some of the bruising remains. And so it became time for me to kind of step back from that at one point. But I
Yeah.
miss it every day. I still miss it.
Oh, well, and I do understand. My best friend Tammy is a special needs teacher. She's been in the special needs program for 35 years or so.
Oh,
She teaches at a high school now, and she'll tell stories about that. You know, some of these kids are really big. You know, 20 years old, strong, athletic, and she's, you know, same thing. She's in her 50s, and there are days where she's getting beat up, and you know, you gotta call somebody in for extra help. So I totally understand, you know. And it again, it's hard because you're coming from a place of caring and concern, and you're trying to do the right thing, but that student or patient, for whatever reason, is just not having it that day, and there's not a whole lot of things you can do. So I totally understand what, you know, what you've, yeah,
on
it's
the other
something.
side, though, I will say that the what I'm proud of most of any of my various careers is that in my time as the director of that psychiatric unit, I was able to almost completely eliminate the use of physical restraint. I don't
Wonderful.
I don't believe in it. There are some cases where you can't avoid it with extreme violence, but really worked with the staff, and I had my staff was the most amazing team because you go through things together, you become a family. But working with them to really focus on being able to talk people down instead of, you know, coercing them into behaving, which isn't how we treat other human beings, particularly those in a crisis, where if you implement restraint, you're creating just one more trauma for them. And we were very successful at almost completely eliminating it. And that there's not going to be anything in my career that I will ever be more proud of than that.
Well, let's get into that for a little bit. You know, not to get crazy political or anything like that, but you know, I've experienced it myself, dealing with the healthcare system here in the country, and I, as I've mentioned before, I work for a large corporation. I have a very good healthcare insurance plan, but there are still hoops and litigation and red tape that I have to go through, and you know, constantly worrying whether or not your claim is going to get denied, or there's going to be some other type of hang up that could affect my job, or you know, things of that nature. And I hear horror stories from people all the time that don't have things as well as I do. But then again, you're also hearing in the news too, you know, big story about defunding the police because they just don't know how to handle people who are having some type of psychotic episode or a breakdown, and they choose violence and like you said, or restraint over, you know, the patience of, let's try and talk this out, let's try and calm this person down before we put them in the back of a squad car. So being in the healthcare field in this country, being in, you know, dealing with patients with mental illness, and just seeing all different aspects of the healthcare industry, what are your thoughts on the state of the country, I guess? I mean, I know that's a really loaded question, but it are I don't know, because I just feel like in the news you're constantly just, it just seems like it's all bad news. It's like, are we getting better? Are we heading in the right direction? Because you know, again, I feel like, and I've had this conversation with our friend Katie before as well. Like I just feel like insurance companies try to make life harder for you than it should, but I don't know that that's everybody's perspective. I'm just interested to hear your thoughts on any of that. Again, I know it's a really loaded question.
It is, but it's one we should all be asking. And one of the reasons why I look happy all the time is because I don't look at the news anymore. I don't.
Yeah, sure.
I had someone who used to be in PR tell me, don't read a news story until at least 2 weeks after it's done being news, because it's all intended to create an emotional reaction in you and never a good one. So tip number one. But back to the question, my view on this might be a bit of an edge case, um, especially someone that's devoted her life to medical care. But if you look at what the real problem is in our health system, it's not the doctors, it's not the cost of a hospital directly. So to compare it to something, I would compare it to college. So tuition, it will continue to rise based on how much money lending agencies are willing to give people to borrow to have that education. And that continually goes up because they love to get all that interest. And so what I paid $25 an hour for in junior college before I went on to my 4-year degree is now $400 an hour at the same school. And yet, granted, it's been a few decades, but that's only because there's lending agencies willing to give the money. So student loans to me are like insurance. The cost of healthcare rises to what the insurers are willing to pay. And I might be wrong on this. This is just my theory, but you know, I'm going to be a provider, and I've been told, like, I'm getting insurance contracts right now, and I'm stunned at, you know, how difficult that is and the hoops you have to go through and everything. But fine, I'll do it. But then I will be billing those insurance companies double what they actually pay me, and that's because I have to cover all the various different levels of payment. But if Blue Cross Blue Shield is willing to pay a health system $10,000 for a surgery, then that health system is going to ensure that it's going to cost them $10,000 to provide it. So they'll raise the cost of everything because they want to maximize their insured benefit, because they do have patients they're going to take care of that are uninsured because of EMTALA. If you go into an emergency room without insurance, they still have to stabilize you. Now, what happens after that is the medical device companies and the pharmaceutical companies know that they can charge the hospitals more money because the hospitals are getting more money. So that cost goes up, and then the hospitals raise their costs to have a margin. And it's just this vicious cycle that we've gotten into. Now, you probably know my eldest lives in London. She's a British citizen. She's been there, I think, 7 years now, or going on 7 years. And she's in national health, the NHS. But also has private insurance from her company because she works for an American company. So she's a little extra coverage, which I'm glad of, because no insult to the NHS, but because they're managing to, you know, there's one payer, and that payer is only going to pay so much, and they negotiate directly with the medical device suppliers and pharmaceutical companies to get the lowest price. Like what we pay $1,500 for here, they pay $100 for there.
Right, right.
So access to care is more challenging because everybody has access to it. And if you want to go to the emergency room and you didn't have a trauma like a car accident, you have to call and make an appointment. And the person that answers the phone can just tell you, no, you can't come in. And that's happened to her before. So there are challenges with the single payer system, but they don't have the issue of those rapidly escalating costs because it's all managed to one payer. So I know what the problem is. I just don't know what the answer is. And no one's asking me anyway, but I wouldn't want to be in the position to come up with the answer. I think at some point we're going to have to find a middle ground between capitalism and socialism, because neither system is perfect.
Right.
You know, we here, if, you know, I had a stroke in my 40s and I was able to say, I want an MRI, I want a CT scan, I want an echo with a bubble study, I want all these things, and get them done. But in a socialized system, you're not going to get 90% of those things. I would never do this, but a lot of people go into the doctor and demand to get antibiotics, even if they don't have a bacterial infection, and the doctors give up and give it to them. So we've got two problems. Number one, cost of care for unnecessary drugs, and then superbugs. That's not going to happen. So the American people aren't ready to be told no when they demand something in healthcare. And it would be a shit show, if I can say that.
You sure can. Yeah.
Okay. It would be an utter shit show if people who are used to certain entitlements, and that's not all American people, but there are a large number of us that feel fairly entitled to a certain level of care, are now told a hip replacement is a optional surgery, and you're going to be on a 7-year waiting list for it instead of being able to schedule it in 2 weeks.
Yeah. So. Well, I mean, that was the concern when I've had a bariatric, I've had gastric sleeve surgery in June. And that was a concern initially because a coworker of mine had the same surgery about 10 years ago. And it was classified very differently. And she kind of had to jump through hoops because they looked at it as something optional. a superficial, surgery, whatever you want to call it. So she had kind of warned me ahead of time, like insurance might not cover everything, and even what they claim to cover, they might find a way to twist it and to say it's not necessary. Thankfully, a lot had changed within the past decade as far as our coverage is concerned, so I didn't have to worry about that as much. But it was something that was, again, while you're filling out the forms and
Mhm.
you're faxing and you're submitting, it is one of those you're not sure what they're going to say. Thankfully, I have great doctors who have been in my corner
That's
throughout
great.
everything. But yeah, and again, if you're somebody, and I say this a lot too, if you're not fortunate like I am to have the kind of care and work for the kind of company I work for, certain things you're going to end up getting denied and without explanation half the time. And in those cases, it's what do you do? What are your options if not to just fork over a bunch of cash you don't have necessarily? So yeah, it's but again, and I've heard that as well, that it's always the big argument, right, about why we won't have socialized healthcare here in this country is because, oh, it's not as glamorous as it sounds, and oh, you're in the waiting room for hours and they'll send you away. And so I've heard that argument as well. But you're right, it's we have to find a balance, and unfortunately that just doesn't seem like we're ever going to get there, because yeah, this country in general, not even about healthcare, we are very entitled to certain creature comforts, and how dare you threaten to take this away from me? I mean, you've seen it all over the years. It's just gotten more and more out of control.
Oh, well, I mentioned I had a stroke and it was caused by, I did not know I had a great big hole in my heart from birth.
I did
Um,
want to ask you about that. Yes.
oh, okay. Well, this is related to what we were just talking about, but um, a quarter of the people walking the earth have this heart defect and don't know it. It's arguably a primary cause of strokes in the absence of other causes. So I was in the best health of my life, perfect body weight at the time, eating a vegan diet. Like I don't smoke. I don't have any real bad habits. I like an occasional drink, but and just was boarding a plane and had a stroke. And so subsequently, and of course, did not get off the plane, flew home before I went to the hospital. Really stupid. Don't recommend it.
Oh
Um,
geez.
yeah, well, I was in New Orleans and didn't trust the hospital there. And I have Northwestern here, which is a stroke center, and I just wanted to go there. But um, subsequent to that, I knew I had a nickel allergy. So what they generally do to fix that heart defect is they put a metal umbrella between the two sides of your heart, open the umbrella, and then it plugs the hole and scar tissue forms so that it reduces your stroke risk. Well, I'm allergic to metal. So, some people, if they put cheap jewelry in, will break out. I knew that, but I had testing and it shows like, I hope I never need a knee or hip replacement because I can't have a big metal joint in
Right,
me.
right.
So at the time, the only option was open heart surgery. And used to be a cardiovascular nurse. And I was not about to have that done in my 40s. And so just went on blood thinners and hoped all would be well. Um, and realized then in that process through social media that there are a lot of us out there. And there are a lot of doctors telling people with nickel allergies and PFOs, which is what the hole's called, it's fine. It's different when we put it in your heart than when you put an earring in your ear, which is absolutely not true, but they can't be held liable. So they're just telling this story. So I started an international kind of advocacy organization for people like me. But at the same time, there's this brilliant man named Anthony Nobles, Professor Dr. Anthony Nobles, who is an inventor, and he invented something called the Noble Stitch, which is they go in just like the device, which is through your groin instead of cracking your chest open, and through your arteries go up into your heart and put a single stitch in. And that was just released like as I was a year into having had a stroke and wondering every day when the next stroke would happen. So I reached out. There was only one doctor in the US doing it at the time, Jim Thompson in Tampa. He's in Tampa now. He was in Virginia then. And he said, you sound like a perfect candidate. And so I flew there and I had my PFO closed. I was the 34th US patient to have it done. It had been used in Europe for a bit before that. There was another US patient that had flown over there first to have it done in the UK. And then So I started a group so that we could get other people to know that this was an option and they don't need to believe everything that their doctor says. But one thing that they're finding is, because it's not fully FDA approved yet, which is how every medical device starts out, insurance companies are getting smart and they're starting to say, no, go ahead and get the metal device. There's no proof that you'll have an allergic reaction.
Right.
But
Well,
once
but
it's in
even
there,
even if it's not a known allergy, I mean, the risk always is that your body may potentially reject something, right? And
absolutely.
again, this is exactly what why I wanted to bring it up, because I've never heard of anything like this, a PFO, but as you said, a quarter of the people have this. So
Mhm.
how can one get tested for something like that?
In general, insurance won't pay for a test unless you
I
have a
was
stroke.
gonna I was gonna ask that question. Yeah.
Yeah, but they can. So the one thing that a PFO causes that most people don't realize is migraines. So chronic migraine sufferers, migraine with aura, almost always will find out that they have a PFO. And that's, to me, at this point in my journey, that's a warning sign that you will eventually have a stroke. There are
Okay.
some people who get them for other reasons, but it is a big cause. And so I had migraines weekly and would lose like the vision in one part of my eye, and it
Wow.
life altering migraines from the time I went through puberty um, until I had my PFO closure. I haven't had a single one in the 7 years since I had my PFO closure.
That's incredible.
Yeah, yeah. So it tells me that anybody that says that they're not connected just clearly does not understand what they're talking about. I haven't even taken so much as a aspirin since I had my closure. It's been life changing. But if you have chronic fatigue or migraines with aura, or your oxygen drops with even slight exertion or standing up, you probably can get someone to do the test for it. Is called an echo with bubbles. So it can't be just a plain
Okay.
old echo. They put an IV in your arm, they agitate some saline, and then they put bubbles through. They're not bubbles that are going to kill you, like big,
Sure. Right.
they're bubbles. And then they watch on the echo to see if the bubbles cross through your heart. And if they do, then you have either a PFO or another kind of communication between the two sides of your heart. And I wouldn't say everybody should be tested, because I would probably 90% of people with one will never even know and never find out that they have it, and they'll never have a problem because it's so small.
Yeah.
But for like me, it would have been great if someone had thought to test me before I had to go through a stroke.
Well, and that's just it. I've heard so many, in addition to your own story, I've heard so many stories of, I didn't know, and it was a simple test. All you had to do was take a simple, I unfortunately I had a friend whose mother passed away. She was diagnosed with cancer and just immediately started the treatment, and come to find out she was adverse to the treatment. But again, had they just taken a simple blood test, and unfortunately I don't remember what it's called at the moment, but if she had just taken a simple blood test, they would have known ahead of time, okay, we have to pivot on what your care is going to be. But she was gone within a couple months of the diagnosis, unfortunately. And then also I've just recently heard about a hereditary blood test, which kind of gives you a heads up. If cancer runs in your family, things of that nature, it kind of is a warning sign. So for certain things that maybe insurance wouldn't initially cover, you take this hereditary blood test, and if something shows up, then all of a sudden, like you said with the stroke, you can go to insurance and say, yes, this is what we've discovered. We know this is a potential issue. So then all of a sudden things like ultrasounds or mammograms, things like that suddenly become covered when previously they wouldn't be. Like, even for myself, breast cancer runs in the family, and I really had to advocate. I really wanted to get a mammogram, and they used to start at 30 and then they pushed it back to 40. I finally got one when I was 36, I think, after being like, listen, my aunt passed away from it. My grandmother has had it twice now. So finally they said, oh, well, okay, I guess we'll fit you in, whatever. But and again, I say this on the pod all the time, guys, you have to be an advocate for yourself. You have to
Oh,
really fight for yourself.
amen.
But yeah, but that's the problem, is when, if A, you don't have insurance, or B, you've got mediocre insurance that just covers the quote unquote basics. What do you do? And again, if it's completely unknown in
Right.
general,
Hmm.
if you don't even know something like that exists. And that's, like I said, why I wanted to bring it up with you, because I just think just such valuable and again, not knowing that, just the, I as you're talking, I'm literally thinking I have to text a friend, because I'm pretty sure this is what her husband has, because he has recently started just passing out. So
That's
that's a concern.
that's a definite possibility, or postural orthostatic tachycardic syndrome, which my middle daughter has. They
Oh my
call it
gosh.
POTS. Is an autoimmune condition that can develop at any point in your life, and is you stand up, you pass out, and she has to be on heart medications in her 20s to keep her. She's a high school history teacher, so she's on her feet all the time, and
Yeah.
yeah, but getting that diagnosis, to your point, was I was advocating for my adult child because the system wants to say it's all in your head, particularly to women.
Yep.
Um, and I have a very rare neurodegenerative condition, and went to 7 different doctors. Every doctor was testing me. They would test me. So for heavy metal poisoning, for Lyme disease, which they put everything off to chronic Lyme, to MS, to everything. And then at some point they're like, probably just anxiety.
Oh
And I
my
was like,
God. Stop.
do you know me? I'm like the least anxious person in the world. Like, I invite craziness into my world.
Yeah.
And but then I went to one last neurologist at Northwestern in Chicago. Her name was Jenny Tavi. She's moved, which I'm so sad about, but she's like, no, this isn't in your head. We're going to figure this out. And she ran a blood test that's really expensive, and almost nobody runs it. It has to go to one lab in Utah,
Wow.
and called me up like 2 weeks later and said, it was a shot in the dark. She's like, but you've got this incredibly rare antibody that is basically, it's like a zombie antibody eating your brain. And it's a paraneoplastic condition. So it means I have hidden cancer somewhere, and that I'm fighting it so hard that my body has mistaken my own brain for it. Only 293 people alive with the condition. Generally has 100-month life expectancy. I way outlived that. Did not do well on the treatments for it. I had meningitis from the treatments, and so I'd
Wow.
stopped doing that. And those were incredibly expensive. I was very lucky to be very well insured. $400,000 a year for those.
Well, I was going to ask, what is the treatment for something like that? And what is that called? And again, like, what are the symptoms? How would anyone, you said only 200 and some odd, like, how would anyone even get to that point where this is what's going on?
My guess is underdiagnosed. So a paraneoplastic condition means alongside cancer. So there are many of them. Breast cancer is a primary cause of different paraneoplastic conditions. Your body just interprets it, it fights the cancer, and then it does crazy things. So it's both autoimmune and cancer related. It's called paraneoplastic cerebellar degeneration in my case. There's all kinds of other paraneoplastic conditions, but what happened to me was I woke up one morning, and when I stood up, I felt like I had balloons on my feet. It's hard to explain because it's neuropathy, but for me, it didn't come like pins and needles. It just felt like my feet were super swollen, even though they weren't. And very quickly, I lost the feeling all the way up to my knees, and I don't have any feeling from my elbows to my fingertips and in most of my face. And so obviously they think of things like Lyme disease and MS and all of that, but I was not diagnosed with any of those things. And then she tested this rare paraneoplastic panel and found out that I have this, it's a PQ voltage gated calcium channel something. And that's my enemy. But my success story with this, and people would have to find a neurologist that would actually do that test and know to ask for a paraneoplastic panel in order to get it done. And since she left, I saw her associate, and her associate's like, it's a hopeless condition. I'm not going to treat you. And I was like,
Wow.
oh, thank you. And so I had stopped treatment, and I was just like kind of trying to figure out what happens next. But I have a pretty sunny disposition, which you have picked up on. And but I hit menopause, which is a whole other fun thing. And so there was the women in the community rave about this doctor. He's an MD, like not a woo-woo doctor. Because I have some real issues with woo-woo science and
That's fair.
stuff. So just because I've seen some real harm done. But anyway, he's a functional medicine doctor, and went to him specifically about my hot flashes. And he sat with me for 90 minutes, unlike a doctor who gives you 15, and asked everything there was about my medical history, my psychological history. And at the end, he goes, I've never heard of your condition. He goes, but I'm going to research it. And he goes, what you've told me is it's autoimmune. He goes, can I experiment on you? And I'm like, why not?
Have at it.
Have at it. And he goes, I've had really good luck with my autoimmune patients using a microdose of the drug that they use for addicts to keep them from craving drugs. And he goes, it's was discovered in AIDS patients to eliminate AIDS-related cancer, like to actually cure AIDS-related cancer way back when. And he goes, so some doctors started using it off label and you have to go to a compounding pharmacist and whatever. He goes, but it's like 1/20th of the dose that you take if you were trying not to drink or use drugs.
Okay.
It's called naltrexone. And they're using it in weight loss drugs now too, because it eliminates cravings, but also at a microdose, what happens is I take it at night, I fall asleep, and sometime for 4 hours in the middle of the night, it shuts down my receptors in my brain for endorphins. And when they open back up, I have a flood of endorphins, and those somehow short circuit my immune system attacking itself. And so he said, you have to give it 6 to 9 months before you say it's doing no good. And I was like, all right, I'm going to trust you, because it's $1 a day as opposed to $400,000 a year. It's just one,
right, sure, yeah,
one low dose of a pill. And within 6 months, it stopped progressing. Within 9 months, it actually started to get better, which I was told was impossible, because once a nerve dies, a nerve dies. And like I said, I've outlived my life expectancy, and I'm working full time, and I started a business, and I'm traveling all over the world. And so I guess the point of all that is, like, there are medical miracles out there, and there are doctors who will listen. And if you find the right one, they are the best partner ever. And sometimes the cure is not immediate. Like, we want immediate gratification. People with neuropathy often want pain relief immediately, but he managed my expectations and said, give me 6 to 9 months to prove it to you. And oh, am I glad that I did? Because it does cause things like super vivid dreams. Like, I dreamt that I had a horse in my car last night, and I woke up absolutely certain I was going to have to be cleaning horse poop out of my car. And then I was like, wait, that was one of those naltrexone dreams.
wow.
And sometimes my jaw gets a little tight. But other than that, like, absolutely no side effects. So I can't, for anybody out there in your audience that's suffering from an autoimmune condition, I highly recommend looking into, it's called low dose naltrexone, or LDN.
Okay.
And there's online ways that you can get it prescribed if you can't find a doctor who is willing to take a chance on it.
Okay. Well, Fiona, I don't know if this is right up your alley, but it sounds like it is to me. I don't know. Check into that. But it's just so fascinating, the whole thing. And I've talked about this ad nauseum in other episodes as well. It's just, and most recently with Katie, talking about how one pill or drug is designed to do one thing, and then all of a sudden we're seeing other applications, and it's just so fascinating to me. It's just mind blowing to me. And like you, I'm a very curious person. That's why I'm doing this podcast. I love people's stories, but hearing things like that, it just blows my mind. Like, and again, it's one of those, like, why are we obsessing about who's going to play at the Super Bowl? Like, stories like this should be shared, and we should be talking about that, and we should be talking about these breakthroughs and these, because and again, it's something that could potentially affect all of us. And it's the unknown, and it's, like, how all the stuff you had to do to get to that point.
Mm-hmm.
And saying again, it's so few doctors do X, and so few doctors know about Y. And it's, I'm very thankful. I've had Dr. A on the show twice now. I'm very thankful to have somebody like him, because he's same thing. While he believes in the holistic approach initially, if that's, if that will help and make things better for you, but he also lives in reality, as I like to say, and he recognizes that sometimes you do need a medication, or sometimes you do need a procedure, and it can't just be all, happy thoughts and herbs, and
Yeah.
so
And when I say woo
yeah,
science, by no means am I
of
talking
course.
about holistic medicine, because I fully believe in that. I'm talking about there are some pretty unsavory characters out there that will take advantage, and they create conditions that don't actually exist, and then a whole host of supplements that you can buy that will cure the condition,
Sure.
preying on people that are just desperate for something. And my doctor, obviously, he's holistic because you have to be in order to be a functional medicine doctor, but he also roots it in science. And that my hope is, there's this incredible level of paranoia since the pandemic about medicine in general, and trust. And, everybody thinks that the pharmaceutical companies drive everything, but if you get a good doctor, someone that you trust, it's
Yeah.
illegal for the pharmaceutical companies to be giving any kickbacks to doctors. So that doesn't happen anymore. Like, everybody thinks my doctor's going to prescribe this because he's getting kickbacks from this big pharma. That's not
Yeah.
how it works.
Yeah.
So whenever I see someone talking about how, my dad is a primary character of this, like, he doesn't trust doctors. He went 30 years without seeing a doctor because one doctor disappointed him. And I'm like, but there's good ones out there. You just have to find
Yes.
them.
Yes. And again, I talk about that all the time too. Any doctor worth their weight in gold will be an advocate for you as well, and will fight for you, and will fight with the insurance company, and will try, okay, sure, insurance won't give you this, but there's this. Let's talk to them again. So, again, you have to keep fighting, but there are options out there, gang. That's not the end all be all. You hear something that you don't like, or you hear something that you're just not getting approval for whatever reason, get a second opinion, go to another doctor. But, it's just human nature. We fear the unknown, and, certain things just sound scary, or they sound icky. Like, I've had a couple of things over the years, and a nurse at my job actually one day said, "Oh, maybe you should consider seeing a neurologist." And I was always like, "But that's like, isn't that like a brain doctor? Like, what would they have to do with, going numb in my hands, or feeling some kind of way in a nerve, on my thigh or whatever." But as I've been going to my chiropractor and sharing things with him, yeah, that might be the next place to look, because this isn't getting any better. It's not getting worse, thankfully, but it's just something to look into. So I think people are hesitant because we come with our own assumptions, right? And so, and again, and the same thing, like, oh, well, my insurance wouldn't possibly cover that. And I mean, Lord knows I had 2 bulge discs last year, and had to jump through all kinds of hoops before they would even consider letting me get an MRI. Uh, so it's some people, and there are people too, even my own mom says, like, listen, I work full time. I work Monday through Friday. I don't have the time to sit on the phone to work it out with this company or that company, let alone set up X appointment and Y, so I do get it. It's just, but at the same time, like, well, I want you to be around for a while. So can you,
Well, and
yeah, you know what I
it
mean? It's
probably
hard.
doesn't help because with my mom, same thing. Like, if you need a specialist, like a neurologist, and you call to make an appointment, it could be 9 to 12 months before you
Yeah.
can get. And so, like, there's also, especially since the pandemic, the backlog just got bigger. And,
Yeah.
just trying to get my youngest daughter in for her annual checkup with a lady doctor, it was like, oh, this was in September. It's going to be earliest next May before we can get her in. I'm like, what? Like,
Yeah.
just a checkup. But it's a lot of good doctors are leaving the profession. They
Yeah.
saw the risk. They went through hell during COVID trying to take care of patients who put up a lot of resistance, and there was a lot more violence towards healthcare workers, and it's just going to get worse over time.
Yeah.
People aren't going into the profession. We are about to have a worldwide crisis of a nursing shortage, and you can't replace a nurse with AI as much as many companies have tried.
Yeah.
If you need physical care when you're physically ill, you're going to need a trained nurse. And it's getting to the point where we're millions of nurses short of meeting the demand with an aging population. So that's, we've got a lot of things kind of coming together all at once that give me a little bit of pause, knowing that I have 3 daughters, like, growing into adulthood and then about to be facing this. So
Yeah. And again, that a lot of that comes with, there's got to be patience, there's got to be grace. And like I said, if you're not happy with your healthcare provider, find another one. And sure, it might take you a couple of months before you get in the door, before you get seen, but it's worth it in the end if you're going to have somebody that's going to fight for you and is actually going to listen to you. And again, going through what I went through with my back, I went to an ortho who I had seen previously for my torn meniscus in my knee. He had operated on my knee. Well, for some reason, I don't know, maybe he got what he needed from me at the time. But when I went about my back, he was not listening. It was a barely a conversation. I think the entire appointment lasted about 4 minutes, and I left really frustrated, really disappointed. I had no more answers than I came there with. And I went and advocated for myself and found another ortho who I absolutely adore and has helped me not only with that, but with some other issues as well. But again, you guys, you've got to do the work. It sucks. Yeah, we don't have that kind of time to dedicate, but all I did was ask around because thankfully I work for a company. It's a very physical job that I do. So I know of a lot of coworkers who have had back issues, who have had knee issues, hip replacements, that kind of thing. And I said, hey, who are you seeing? Who are you going to? And but again, unless you're asking those questions and putting yourself out there, you could end up in a bad situation, and I don't want that for anybody. So do yourselves a favor, get out there, get second, get third opinion. You guys heard from Fiona's episode how many different doctors, it took her a decade before she got a proper diagnosis. So it's a crappy reality, but it is reality, and all we can do is fight for ourselves.
Absolutely. I could not have said it better myself.
So what else do I want to talk about? I just feel like you've got such an extensive history, and it's all just so very fascinating for me. So what, I mean, you're at a point in life where you should be thinking about retiring, not starting a business. So what drives you to keep going? And I mean, are you ever going to retire? Is this something that you think you're just going to keep doing this stuff, until you're dying day?
I can't imagine myself fully retired ever. What I'm really enjoying now is moving from the role, I mean, staying as a lifetime learner, but also as a mentor. I have, I think, 9 people on the team or on other people's teams that I'm mentoring right now, which I absolutely love, getting them excited about learning and taking on different roles and challenging themselves. So I can't see in my next 10 years wanting to leave my day job. This is the job that will be my last in the corporate world. I'll stay in it as long as I want, but I don't want to change jobs again. I love
Sure.
where I work.
Sure.
The business, so in the state of Illinois, we're what they call a CPOM state, corporate practice of medicine. So non-clinicians, and I know I am a clinician, but I'm not a therapist, so cannot own a therapy clinic. So there's all these legal machinations that happen. So I own the master services organization, and my clinic director, Tracy, owns the practice, and then it's doing business as Elemental Health, which is the name of our clinic. But the goal for me is for Tracy to run it and for me to financially back it, and it to be more of an investment in the community than it is a job for me. And I will always be doing outreach and being involved to an extent, but it's not something where I'm going to have to go into an office every day. I trust Tracy implicitly. We work together at the hospital where I was director of behavioral health. So we've known each other 20 years. And possibly hand it off to my youngest. She may or may not become a therapist at some point. She's really into forensic psychology right now. So she might not be that might be a different area of psychology. But, if I do get more retired, if I do leave my day job, I will be traveling. That's how I want to travel until I can't travel anymore. You've probably seen it. We do a lot of it. Our daughter lives in London, so we go there and then we'll use that as a jumping off point to get somewhere else in the world. And last year we did Hawaii. Iceland was awesome. Got to get lowered into a volcano.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was so much fun. And let's see, what else did we do? London several times. But putting on those miles. And then my company is assigning me to work with their Latin American division this year. So I'm going to be visiting a lot of Central and South American countries for my job, which I'm excited about because I've never been anywhere but Mexico, and
Okay.
um, very interested in that. We do a lot of European travel because of my daughter, but now I can see some other places. So, yeah, I mean, my husband and I do have it on the docket to be, staying in a country and like going local for a month at a time when we finally don't have to actually be at work every day.
Well, and let me ask, what does your husband do?
He works for Office Depot corporate
Oh,
in the
okay.
medical field. So he supplies office supplies to the big health systems around the
Oh,
country.
cool.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So we have adjacent jobs. The
Right.
company that I worked for the last time is the one that he has worked with for almost 30 years. So
Oh, cool.
yeah.
That's awesome. So now again, so throughout your career and the different things that you've done, like you said, I had no knowledge of this, I had no expertise in that. A lot of times people will see that on a job description and that'll be a deterrent and that'll be the first thing that, oh, there's just no possible way. So what advice do you have for somebody that may be looking to do something differently but just doesn't feel confident in their skills or ability to go after jobs like that might not be in their wheelhouse?
So, yeah, I have related to what you just said. I have two things. Number one, as long as you can explain your job changes and you haven't burned any bridges. So, I think of healthcare as a cul-de-sac. Um, Everyone that I encounter will come back around, and I will either deal with them as a client or as a coworker or in some capacity. So, I never burn a relationship ever. And put high value on what I learned from everybody. And so I've never left a job badly. I've always given the proper notice. I've in many cases been upfront, like with the critical access hospitals, about how long my body could handle that kind of travel. But
Yeah.
that here's the contribution that I will make in the 2 years that I'm here. So that's how you kind of manage if you're going to do different things and experiment with careers. Just make sure that you do it in an ethical and professional way. And then as for taking on challenges, that's not good for everybody. I would not recommend it. Some people do not like change and do not like uncertainty, and that's totally okay. I, for some reason, thrive in it. But if you've identified that it's not your thing and that you like consistency, and then don't do it. But if you enjoy learning and you really can dig in, and if you're going to lead something, you have to be willing to get down to the deepest levels of it and know what your people do, which is why I'm trying to learn coding, even though I don't technically have to. I want to understand what the challenges are that they're going through.
Yeah.
Um, but if you enjoy learning, like this kind of career hopping, to me has just kept me engaged and excited. There's no burnout because you're never anywhere long enough to. My longest job was the 13 years that I was at the hospital in Chicago, and I probably could have. Many people that I worked with are still there and will retire from there and love it. But it was the best advice I ever got for me to stop being so homegrown and go try some new things, because I've had these fantastic experiences. So I will
Yeah.
say that not this way in every corner of my life. My husband was a high school sweetheart. We've been together since high school and we're both in our 50s now. So I like that consistency. Um, yeah, that's
Yeah.
there's, and I hate moving house. This is my second house. It'll be my last, but I absolutely hate moving. I want to stay in one place.
Yeah, I've said that myself. I'm like the only way that I would ever move again is if I had that extra money to throw around and have somebody else take care of it for me because it's
Oh,
just
yes.
yeah, moving is
And
the
we even
worst.
had that, but just looking at all the crap you accumulate when you live in a house for
Yeah.
the all 20 some years that we did. And I was very disappointed in myself.
I
We
will
can't,
say you have some pretty great crap though. Like at the Christmas time, whenever you put up all of your pictures of decorating throughout the house, I'm like, okay, they know what they're doing.
that's
It
all
looks like
Jim.
so much fun out there. It's
That is
too
all
funny.
my husband. He is like an elf. I'll go on a business trip and come home and all of that is done. It's wonderful.
That's fantastic.
I
That's
really,
great.
because I'm not like I'm not a decorator. I do the cooking. He does the
And
decorating.
you guys, Robin freaking can cook. And that's what I also think is so fascinating too. Because again, like you said, you're a vegan, but you will post, look at the ribs that I made, look at the brisket that I made for the carnivores in the house. And I'm like, oh my God, like you really do. You throw down in the kitchen. It is impressive.
I love the creativity of just getting something in front of me and turning it into something that will make people happy. Cooking that's my creative out. I'm not a creative like many people are. I have a terrible singing voice. I don't play any instruments. I can't draw or paint, nothing like that. But you put me in a kitchen and give me quality ingredients, and I'm on my way. So, and yeah, I mean, I went vegan for health reasons, but I don't mind cooking it as long as I'm one of those people that feels like you have to use every bit of your food, like no waste.
Mm,
So I have worm farms in my garden, like in ground. And so all the food waste goes into the worm farms and they turn that into, gold in the garden. And then I take all the bones from the animals and turn it into bone meal for the garden. And so like we're close to no waste here, which makes me feel better about cooking
yeah,
animals,
that's
you know.
fascinating. That's awesome. Oh my goodness. Well, I can't thank you enough again for doing this. And I really hope listeners, I hope you guys have learned some things. I certainly did. And it just so for me, I run towards this stuff every time I hear something. I'm like, okay, so now I have to get tested for this, and now I have to go get tested for, you know what I mean? Like, because I want to know and I want to be on top of things like that. I know there are a lot of people who are like, oh, I don't want to go to the doctor because they'll give me bad news every time I'm there. It's like, well, don't look at it that way. You're being proactive and not reactive. I feel like that's just such an important way to live your life. Just always be proactive, always try to have the best possible outcome. But, not everybody has that kind of philosophy. But you guys, this was Robin. Thank you so much. This was Try Not to Curse, and we will catch you next time.